Hey everyone, welcome to the fourth episode of America Unplugged. I'm your host Manny, and today I'm not as enthusiastic. I'm saddened. I am frustrated, and I am concerned for our country's future. Today, for those who aren't listening on the same day that this airs, is January 7th, 2021, and yesterday, the 6th, there was an incident in Capitol Hill that resulted in the death of one protester. And this all goes back to what I've been preaching from the get-go. We are more polarized than ever. We are angry, anxious, divided, and all of these social media outlets, all of these news networks are only making the situation worse. Each side tends to get more and more extreme, and there are no people in the middle that are willing to work together to get things done. And it's angering because what happened yesterday is the direct result of all of this. It's a bubble that's going to burst. I think it has burst. Just let that sink in. An American civilian was shot and killed on American soil at the nation's capital. Now, I'm not going to start pointing fingers because I think we're all at fault here as Americans, and we need to take a step back and look at what the hell we're doing with our country and what each of us is doing to contribute to that. It's angering. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. If you identify with a party, you're part of the problem. George Washington warned about how political parties can cause further divide. Party affiliation is just another form of tribalism, to where you create a bubble or you join a bubble of like-minded people, and whoever doesn't agree with you is your enemy. Democrats versus Republicans, the right versus the left, liberals versus conservatives. We won, or they won, or we lost, or they lost. If you speak like that, you're part of the problem. At the end of the day, we're all Americans, and we need to do what's right for our country and each American citizen in this country. Yet here we are. Someone was shot and killed. Others went into the Capitol. And if you look up news media stories, which I strongly advocate against, you'll find some sources calling it a riot, other sources calling it a terrorist attack, other sources calling them American patriots. The list goes on. Just reading the titles, you can see how polarized and how opinionated these pieces are from these news outlets, and they're just feeding this to you. And you're the one who's going to end up getting hurt. Not them. They only care about the money. They only care about you clicking on their sites and listening in to their stations and viewing them on streaming services and on television. But they can't both be right. Someone's got to be right, someone's got to be wrong, or maybe they're both wrong, who knows? It's just causing us, we the people, more pain, more suffering. I couldn't believe what some people have said when this young lady was shot and killed. Some of them said, good shot. Other ones said, good riddance. Damn it, people. This is an American citizen. Just because she has a different political opinion than you, you wish death on her? What does that say about you as a human being? All because she has a difference in opinion. Take a strong look at yourself. Every single American needs to take a look at themselves. If they're letting something such as political differences justify someone's death. Yes, I understand that she was breaking into a building, or into the building. She was crawling in through a window. Does that justify her being shot and killed? If you say yes, you need to reassess your priorities, and you need to reassess yourself as a human being. That would be equally as upset as if it happened to someone on the other side. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all American citizens. And damn it all, if political opinions will stand between us being humane and acting civilized and having a bit of compassion and empathy. Yet here we are today. And again, just reading the news articles show you how opinionated and how polarized we've become. We're slaves to these media outlets, to the press. They're telling us what to think. We're the ones getting played. Congratulations. It's tragic. That's why I don't identify as a Democrat. I don't identify as a Republican. I am an independent because I understand the dangers of tribalism. How many of you actually vote based off of policy, based off of legislation, and not this false sense of party loyalty? If you think for 1 second that these career politicians have your best interest at mind, I don't know what to tell you. Be independent. Think for yourself. And the only thing you should abide by is the United States Constitution. Don't think that one party is more patriotic than the other and vice versa. You don't owe your loyalties to any party. The United States Constitution is the only thing you need to abide by. Now, speaking of the Constitution, let's go ahead and dive right in. Give you guys a little bit of a lesson. Now, I recommend if you don't have one, as an American citizen, you need to own your copy of the Constitution. They sell them in little booklet forms. If you want to buy it in post-it forms, download a copy onto your phone. Become acquainted with it. Because at one point in time, it was something to learn and study in the United States. Not so much anymore. People no longer vote based off policy. People vote based off of how nice or how mean a politician is. How they grin through their teeth and give you false promises, many of which are unconstitutional. I don't care what side or what's where you land on the political spectrum. If you follow the U.S. Constitution, we wouldn't have a problem. It was written in plain terms. Granted, plain terms for that point in time, but if you have a high school level literacy, then you should have no problem interpreting it. There's no need to study constitutional law to understand the United States Constitution. People just choose not to. It's the intentional dumbing down of our nation. Get yourself a copy of the Constitution, research it, study it. If you find words that you're not familiar with, Google it. There's no excuse in today's technological era. Forget about party affiliation, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. I don't give a damn about that stuff. Be an independent. Vote on candidates based off of what policies they support that are constitutional. Don't forget that these members of Congress, these politicians, the President and Vice President of the United States of America, they serve the American people. They serve you. The government is for the people, by the people. Anyways, let's start with the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government of a redress of grievances. The First Amendment clearly states that we have the right to peacefully assemble, people, peacefully assemble, and petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, for you right-wingers out there who are condoning the actions of people breaking into a government building and photobombing in the offices of members of Congress, is that considered peaceful assembly? And for you left-wingers who are giving the peaceful protesters a hard time in Washington because they don't agree with what's going on, you're in the wrong too. Follow the Constitution. It clearly states what you can and cannot do, and what rights you have that cannot be infringed upon. The people who were peacefully, keyword peacefully, assembling and protesting were within their constitutional rights to do so. Take the time to be well versed in the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. Even if you don't necessarily agree with their political views, try to look at the bigger picture. Stop being so damn selfish for 1 second. When people on the left peacefully protested, keyword peaceful, I'm not talking about the riots where cities were getting burnt down and businesses were getting destroyed. Peacefully protesting. There were some things I didn't agree with, but so long as it was peaceful, I understood the importance and the relevance of protecting those freedoms, even if I don't agree with their views, because anything otherwise will be tyrannical. And to pick and choose what the Constitution applies to simply based off of what you agree and disagree with is hypocrisy at best. Don't call yourself a patriot when you try to silence someone who's peacefully protesting simply because their views don't agree with yours. Try to get the bigger picture. We don't want a tyrannical government that'll silence people because they disagree. Anyways, moving right along. Now, a major part of what's going on in Washington, a major part of the protests is because, well, actually all of it, is because of the November elections and also Georgia's elections for the Senate. We'll get into the significance of that in a second. But first, I want to talk about voting. Now, whether or not there's voter fraud, you'll hear each side debating. The right claims that there is voter fraud enough to overthrow the election. The left says that there is no voter fraud. I'm not going to get into who's right and who's wrong. I'm not going to get into speculation. This is not a conspiracy channel, and if that's what you're looking for, you're in the wrong place. What I am going to talk about is the significance and the importance of your vote and why it should be taken seriously and how we can avoid these types of clashes in the future. Your vote is your right as an American citizen, and it holds more weight than you can imagine. Don't take for granted 1 second that you live in our great constitutional republic. You live in the greatest nation of the world, and people have fought and died for your freedom and your right to vote. Don't take that for granted. Freedom isn't something that you're entitled to simply because you're born here or become a citizen of this country. It's something that has to be preserved. Now, if there is a possibility of voter fraud, any possibility at all, you should take that very, very seriously, regardless of whether you're Democrat or Republican. That means that people are openly willing to put our way of government and our way of life at stake. You should take personal offense to that. Again, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. If there was ever an instance of voter fraud, you should be equally as upset. How do we stop that from happening? Well, I know that some states have mail-in ballots. All states have an option for absentee ballots. Know the difference. But unless you're physically unable to, be it a disability, you're out of state, or you are military, vote in person. States should mandate a government-issued photo ID. The thought of someone taking your vote and falsifying it, forging it, should be angering to you. It's that important. Oh, but Manny, not having a photo ID is considered discriminatory because blah, 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 blah. Bull. Most things today require a photo ID. You apply for a job, you need some kind of government-issued ID. You travel on a plane. You want to operate a motor vehicle. You want to open up a bank account. Photo IDs are accessible and should pretty much be mandatory for voting. Anyone who suggests otherwise or who thinks that it's some form of oppression, they're lying to you. And I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse with a stick when saying this, but again, this is not a political thing. This is not a partisan issue on whether or not identification should be required for voting. It's common frickin' sense. Just think about it for a second. These votes determine who will hold positions in our government that will ultimately affect our everyday lives. And if you want to stop the fighting, if you want to stop the division, if you want to stop the divisiveness and the conflict and the questioning, make voting in person. Oh, but COVID-19, really? No one was crying COVID-19 when people were raiding Walmarts and every major retailer on Black Friday. I voted in person, and the place that was for my district, they had social distancing measures in place. There was no excuse. Vote in person. Your vote counts. Don't take it for granted. And you should be as upset at the thought of anyone forging your ballot as you would be if someone forged your signature to take out a $50,000 loan against your name and your credit. Don't take it for granted. Don't take your freedoms for granted. Don't take your rights for granted. Moving right along. Back to party affiliation and why this is extremely, extremely dangerous. The Founding Fathers understood that too much political power can lead to corruption. That is why they created the 3 branches of government: the executive, which is the president, vice president, and their cabinet; the legislative, which is Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate; and the judicial, Supreme Court being the highest up, and all the courts under them. Now, these were called the checks and balances, to keep each other in check, to avoid corruption and too much power. Now, when we dive into the world of political parties and tribalism, people tend to vote in that way, in the best interest of the party loyalty, rather than the best interest of the American people and themselves. Understand the significance of how dangerous it is to have a one-party system predominantly in our government. Now, you know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the president and vice president-elect. What a lot of people seem to have confused is the significance of the Georgia election. Now, that will fall under the legislative branch, where the Democrats already own the House of Representatives, the House for short. So the big thing in Georgia was the Senate race. And all the Democrats had to do was flip the 2 Senate seats in Georgia in order to have a 50-50 Senate. Half Republican, half Democrat. Why is that significant? Article 2, Section 3 states, and I quote, "The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided." And this was something that was established back when John Adams was Vice President of the United States. Why is that significant? Well, because according to the US Constitution, the only part of government that can introduce any piece of legislation is the legislative branch. They introduce and create the bills that will be either enacted into law or not. First, it has to pass through the House, then it has to pass through the Senate, and then it arrives at the president's desk, in which the president can then veto or approve the bill. So if the Democrats already own the House, and now the Senate is split 50-50, Democrat and Republican, who gets to determine what passes the Senate? The Vice President. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And then in turn, it will end up in President-elect Joe Biden's desk to be enacted into law. So in this particular case, the Vice President arguably has more power than the President of the United States himself. And this is why party affiliation is dangerous. And I would be saying the same thing if it were the Republicans doing this. Because what's going to happen now is that any piece of legislation that the Democrats introduce are going to be fought by the Republicans, but pushed forward by fellow Democrats. And they will have a join us or else mindset, as all politicians do. And because they own the House, it'll pass on through the House. Because the Senate is 50-50, then Kamala Harris will determine the final vote. And then it'll cruise on through to President-elect Joe Biden's desk. That is dangerous, people. I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're Republican. That directly contradicts the checks and balances that the Founding Fathers put in place to protect our constitutional republic. That opens up the doorway, it opens up the floodgates for corruption, because there's nothing standing in the way. Think about that for a second. There's nothing standing in the way. Now, speaking of politicians, part of the problem, in my opinion, is that nowhere in the Constitution does it state term limits for members of Congress. Now, the 22nd Amendment sets term limits for the President and Vice Presidents of the United States, but not for members of Congress, which is where you get the term career politicians because they are re-elected over and over and over after their term ends. Now, I propose that we add a third section to the 22nd Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that sets term limits for members of Congress, both the House and the Senate. Because the Founding Fathers feared that the longer someone stayed in power, the higher the probability of them being corrupted with that power. Set term limits, get rid of party affiliation, and abide by the U.S. Constitution. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and expand the 27th Amendment of the United States Constitution. The 27th Amendment states, and I quote, "No law bearing the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened." What that basically says is that if there's going to be any change in compensation for being a member of Congress, it won't happen until the next term. Well, the first problem is most of these congressmen are re-elected into their positions due to things such as gerrymandering that ensures that they are not contested. But the second thing is that because the Constitution in this particular case is relatively vague, you open up the doorway for corruption through major gifts, through lobbyists, through being compensated in unethical ways. And that happens all the time with career politicians. They are bribed. So I propose adding Section 1 to the 27th Amendment of the United States Constitution that states that no member of Congress shall accept any major gifts or any form of compensation that may be considered bribery or that may persuade them to vote in a way that they otherwise may not have voted in. So when you take those two things, you add term limits to members of Congress, and you do away with the possibility of them being influenced monetarily, that right there eliminates most corruption. We need to take back our country. America needs to wake up. These politicians do not have our best interest at heart. Do away with these old tards that have been sitting in Congress longer than most of us have been alive. Being a government official, being a member of Congress, was not intended to be a position that required insane credentials. You don't have to study constitutional law or have 5 years of experience in a political platform in order for you to serve as a member of Congress. As a matter of fact, the qualifications for being elected are also clearly stated in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 2 clearly states that no person shall be a representative who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. That's it. That's it for the House of Representatives. For the Senate, no person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30 years and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. That's it. Those are the qualifications per the U.S. Constitution as to who qualifies to be a member of Congress. Oh, Manny, that sounds a little vague. Yeah. It's meant to be that way. It was purposely written that way because the Founding Fathers understood that career politicians can and most likely will be corrupt, and that the government is for the people, by the people. You don't need a degree to be a member of Congress. They wanted your blue-collar workers, your doctors and your lawyers, your businessmen, your farmers. They encouraged and wanted and envisioned all of them across a spectrum to be motivated to take office, because Congress is intended to be a representation of the people. Members of Congress are our representatives. So naturally, you'd want someone who can relate to you to be your representative. It's common sense. This is the United States of America. We don't appeal to royalty and then you have the peasants. No, the founding fathers understood that. They didn't want the United States solely run by doctors and lawyers and other people of quote-unquote prestigious positions. Every American voice counted, and should still count today. But somehow we strayed away from that. Somehow we stopped educating American citizens and our children about the US Constitution and what the founding fathers intended and envisioned for our country. And here we are today, more divided than ever. Us versus them, left versus right, Republican versus Democrat, left wing versus right wing. Every single last one of you should be ashamed of yourselves, because this is why we're in the mess that we're in today. And now, the checks and balances that our founding fathers have carefully developed and put in place for us to not destroy ourselves from within is completely out the window. And again, I would be saying the same thing if it were the Republicans doing it. We need balance. We need bipartisanship. It's not us versus them, but we also can't let one party rule all. That's tyranny. But everyone's so short-sighted that they don't see that. Everyone's being promised this and that, but they're not picking up on what they'll lose. And what ticks me off the most is that I have 2 small children and 1 on the way. What future is going to be left for our children when our constitutional republic falls? Everyone's fighting amongst each other, and they're too busy doing that to where they can't take a step back and realize that we're only destroying ourselves. And you're letting the media, you're letting social media, you're letting the press keep on dividing you. Keep on filling you with hatred and resentment and anxiety. Anyways, if you're listening in, agree, disagree, I don't know what to tell you. If there's anything that I want you to take away from this, is do yourself a favor and stop affiliating yourself with political party. Become an independent. And the only thing that you should be loyal to is the United States Constitution. Grab yourself a copy, become well versed in it, know your rights as an American citizen, and don't take your vote for granted. Stop letting the media tell you how to think and what to think. Unplug yourself. Become a free thinker, with your only loyalty being to the US Constitution. This is Manny with America Unplugged, signing out.